This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me, and if not, please let us know in the chat. We have to just be patient with technology. Don't you just love it? So again, my name is Crystal Sanford. Awesome. So again, my name is Crystal Sanford, and I am your host today for our topic, which is IEP 2.0 Beyond the Basics. And welcome. Just a little bit of housekeeping for those who are joining us virtually. Feel free. I always love to engage the parents who are attending, and I value your feedback. And so please do provide any feedback that you might have either to Amanda, or you can feel free to email me here at info@sdautismhelp.com. And also feel free to take as many breaks as you need while you're listening this evening. And as Amanda mentioned, we will have our final 20 minutes of a live Q&A session. So feel free to just keep adding those questions to the chat, and I'll do my best to answer those for you this evening. So a little bit about myself. I am the owner of Sanford Autism Consulting. So I am an autism mom. My daughter is 10 years old, and she is on the autism spectrum. I also am a special needs sibling. I'm a speech pathologist. I'm a special education advocate as of 2016 when I opened my practice, Sanford Autism Consulting. And so after spending over 20 years supporting families as a speech pathologist in the school environment, once my daughter was identified with autism, a few years passed, and I realized that I really wanted to support families in a different way, where I could make more movement in supporting families and empowering them. And so that's where I opened up my practice. And there's a picture of my family, a little bit older picture there. And so the purpose of my practice really is to empower families around the IEP process. So autism is my wheelhouse, although I do support families who have children with all types of unique needs. And my goal is to move you from frustration and overwhelm, what so many of us experience in the IEP process, and then helping you shift to confidence and hope. And I hope that you leave here with a level of hope at the end of our presentation. So some disclosure and proprietary information. There is no financial compensation for this presentation. Also know that the information that is presented here in this PowerPoint should not be shared with those who have not attended, but feel free to use the information at your discretion for your needs through the IEP process. Also note that the information that is shared is for your informational purposes only. If you are in need of legal or medical advice, I ask that you contact a professional in that area. And so what will you leave here with today? Hopefully with value added by the end of our class. We will be identifying the IEP pitfalls to avoid, what to say, what not to say, differentiating and determining the appropriate services for your child, and knowing how much is truly enough. And then also, my goal is that you will understand when working with a special education advocate is appropriate, or potentially a special education attorney, or both. So here's our agenda. We'll talk a little bit about IEP history, then and now. We'll address the IEP parent pitfalls, related services, the attorney advocate conversation, and then some final thoughts on IEPs before our live Q&A. So here is our first poll. And again, for those who are engaging virtually, I always am looking for ways to gauge the learning and connect with you. So let me know in the chat, how has your IEP experience been so far? For some, I know that you may be early in your IEP journey. Maybe for others, you've had several IEP meetings. What's been your experience so far? Has it been awesome? Has it been, well, just good or fair? Or has it been terrible? I hope not, but I know that unfortunately, some parents, many parents do have this experience. So how's your IEP experience been so far? Let's see if we can, in the chat, you can share with us so that you can see who is engaging tonight. Are we kind of all at different spaces in our IEP journey, I imagine? But then hopefully we're all leaving here with information that will add to your empowerment along the IEP process. Oh, okay. And then just okay, I see. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I can relate. I can relate again. I'm a professional, but I attend IEP meetings for my own child and have been for her since 2014. So I get it, and I get as well in my work as an advocate that some teams do an okay job. Unfortunately, some teams do not, and so it sounds like we're kind of all on the same page there. So let's still dive in here to a little bit of history around IEPs. Where does this all come from? Again, this is really a young area in our nation. Only since 1975 has there even been free for all special education services. And so prior to that, prior to 1975, like again, I'm a special needs sibling. My sister is 55 years old. So there was no free and appropriate education for her. But since 1975, we have had the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And as a result, schools are responsible to find and provide special education services and a free and appropriate education to any child that has a suspected disability in the least restrictive environment. So always remember, there's so many acronyms that get tossed around, but always remember FAPE and the LRE. So a free and appropriate education is what your child deserves, and they should receive that in the least restrictive environment. And so this should be, as much as possible, to the greatest extent possible, your child should receive their education along with their general education peers. IDEA protects the rights of children who have unique needs, as well as their parents. There are a host of rights related to that, and I know that you guys learned a lot about that with Thomas Nelson at last time's presentation about IEPs. IDEA covers children from birth to 21, and every state is different though. For example, in California, children are covered through age 22 and a half. And at that point, either at the time of diploma or at the time of age 22 and a half, young adults are transitioned into services in California, for example, through the regional center, and they will receive support there. But until then, their supports are provided by the school district. And IDEA drives IEPs as well as the state's education code. So for us, the California Education Code. So where are we now? What's happening now when it comes to IEPs? We know a little bit about the history now. Well, lots of kids need IEP services. Okay, this is one of the problems. There's been exponential growth in the amount of children who require services. And so, for example, we know with autism, 1 in 54 children by age 8 were diagnosed with autism in 2016. 1 in 5 students with language-based learning disability, typically dyslexia, the most common. OHI for our kiddos, typically who have attention deficit disorder, would qualify for an IEP under OHI. So that's 1 in 16. As well, either SLD, specific learning disability, or OHI. And then 1 in 42 children, if they don't qualify for an IEP, they do qualify for a 504 plan, which is a plan that it provides children with access to accommodations in the public school system. So there's been exponential growth. However, the system is broken. There's so many more children who require services than they did back in 1975, right? But the funding hasn't changed, and the service supports haven't changed to match that growth. And so if you see here, Congress promised 40% of the funding that would be required for the extra cost for special education, and there's only been about 14.6% of that actually been provided. So as a result, somebody's not getting something. Some children are not receiving their services, or it takes a fight to get that, unfortunately. Now, there is some promise with the new relief bill that our President, Joe Biden, is getting passed. And so there is some promise that there will be an increase in their provision of funds for schools. Now, how will that trickle down to actually schools getting access to those funds so that they can use that? And what will schools use that for? There's going to be a lot of freedom in how they can use those funds. So how that's going to trickle down to our actual children is yet to be determined. So we will see. But what is the solution since there is this problem? Well, our goal is to work collaboratively with schools. And I'm a big proponent, I've been in schools for many, many years. And so schools are not to be seen as the enemy. However, I encourage parents to work collaboratively with schools within a business mindset. And education truly is a business. And if we can keep schools accountable, you can see success for your child. So we're going to move into our discussion around IEP pitfalls. And I'm a big proponent of quotes. I love quotes. And so you're going to see a few of them tonight. And here's one. In life, we make mistakes, we learn from them, and we do better next time. So as I'm going through these pitfalls, if you see something that you have, engaged in, or something that has been maybe one of your paradigms, have no fear. We learn and we do better. And so let's see how we can grow out of this conversation. So one pitfall that I see parents engaging in is becoming too friendly with their child's IEP team. And this might seem odd. Oh, well, too friendly. You just said, we're supposed to work collaboratively with our team. However, there is a space, there is a fine line of being your child's teacher's friend and being their collaborative business partner. And I have this example. I worked with a parent several years ago, and she was friends with the secretary, and she volunteered, and she did so much around the school. Yet she had a child who was having some difficulty at school. And after her conversation with me, she said, you know what? Wow, I should have said something a long time ago. She was thinking that it was, her child was hard to manage, and it was, she felt so bad for the teacher, when in reality, the school was not taking their responsibility in providing her child with what he needed. But because she had such a friendly relationship, such a social relationship with the school and the members at the school, she was hindered in her ability to advocate for her child. And so there is a space. I tell parents, personally, I don't recommend that you are Facebook friends with your child's teacher, or that you text or go to happy hour with the people on your child's IEP team. That just will blur the lines a bit when it comes to having to navigate and successfully advocate for your child. So being too friendly can be a pitfall. Being too aggressive, so of course the converse is also true. No one wants to engage with a bully, and so being overly aggressive and name calling and such things can also not serve you well when it comes to advocating for your child and navigating the IEP process. And there is a space in the law around parental cooperation. So if you are deemed not to be engaging in cooperatively with your team, and you have to eventually go to due process and file a complaint, that will not serve you well when it comes to what the hearing officer, what the judge finds in that ruling. And so there's a balance. Again, like with everything, we're looking for balance. So too emotional can also be a pitfall, and this is really hard. The nature of IEPs is emotional. We are advocating for our children. We are highly invested in the process. However, what you can do to help to handle the emotions, without the waterworks going in the middle of your meeting, well, you can bring someone with you. And I always encourage parents, bring someone with you to your IEP meeting. It could be your service coordinator through a regional center. It could be a friend, a family member, a babysitter, anyone who has unique, special knowledge about your child. You have the right to bring them with you to the meeting. And then you have more of an unbiased third party who can be there to engage and really get the information and help you to stay on track. Also, you can bring your pre-written notes. So prepare your notes ahead of time. Think about the questions that you might have when have a clear and sound mind. Sit down with your cup of coffee and think about those things and write that down so that you're prepared with those questions ahead of time. And that'll really help you to better navigate these IEP interactions. Lastly, another pitfall is best versus appropriate. And so if you remember in the couple of slides before this, we talked about IDEA, and it promises a free and appropriate education. So IDEA does not promise the best education that your child can receive, although as a parent, don't we all want what's best for our child? We do. However, Law says that schools are responsible to provide an appropriate education. And so you can really use that language to help move forward in your IEP discussions. And so, for example, if you're maybe having some pushback or you have a question about a goal, you might say, you know, I have a question about this goal. I'm concerned that this goal may not be what is appropriate for my child, and it might not be a part of a free and appropriate education for my child. Again, you might maybe IEP meetings are happening late, for example. You might share with the team in writing that, you know, you're concerned that your IEP meeting is not being held on time, and you're not being able to see that free and appropriate education be provided for your child with the delay in these IEP meetings. So using the language of the law can be very powerful and very meaningful. Also, using terminology such as best can also not serve you well, again, when it comes to potentially cases where you're having a due process complaint or filing a complaint. So asking for what is appropriate is your right under the law, and that's what I encourage. So here are a few tips and tricks, and you'll see a few of these this evening. One of them is, you'll see this side is all about things that are recommended and things to avoid as you're navigating your IEPs, as you are documenting things in writing. And again, if it's not in writing, parents, it never happens. So always remember to put your requests in writing, but just some recommendations here. In lieu of questioning, you may just ask clarifying questions. You might share, for example, with your team, you know, it was nice to chat with you today. It was my understanding in our conversation that my child has not received speech services for 3 months. Can you confirm that? That's just a clarifying question. You're not, it's very matter of fact. You're not, you know, throwing anybody, you know, under the bus per se, or you're just being matter of fact. And that's the kind of question that will get movement versus, I am angry because you guys are denying my child their speech services. And you know, using that kind of language again is what will not move you forward in the IEP process as much as asking the clarifying questions. Also stating the facts, you know, and again, referring to a reliable reporter when you're stating the facts can be very, very powerful. So unfortunately, through hearing officers' due process when you're filing complaints and such things, unfortunately, judges do not see parents as a reliable reporter. And that's really unfortunate, but it's true because, again, we're so invested in our children and in their education. However, if you can refer to your child, if you can refer to maybe the professional that you're working with, maybe the private therapist that your child's seeing, if you can refer to those people, they are seen as a reliable reporter. So you might state, you know, that, you know, my child's private OT mentioned that they should have this skill by age 5. Can you tell me more about that? You're just stating a fact. You're stating a fact that was told to you by a reliable reporter, and you're just asking for some clarification. You're putting that in writing, and that can be very powerful as you're navigating IEPs. And keeping your email short and sweet, not emailing teams daily. It is good to, and I always encourage parents to put in somewhere in the IEP to have a space for home to school communication, and so that you and the team have a clear expectation of how often you expect to, you know, have contact, what that looks like. So if you guys agree to daily, then that's fine, as long as everyone's on the same page. But I encourage you to keep your email short and sweet. And some of the things to avoid here, again, those emotionally charged words that could put your IEP team on edge, such as, you know, it's impossible for my kid to get an education here. These are words that may just change the tone of your interaction with your team. The snarky, the passive aggressive tone in the emails, you're wanting to say something but not really wanting to say it. You know, we all get that. And so these are, again, some things to avoid that will maybe adversely impact your interaction with your team. And here are some things that you can, just adding in and having a few of these, I believe that you will see more movement in your negotiation with your IEP team. Another quick tip, I heard this from a really great lawyer. He encourages parents to create an email account specifically for your school interactions. And I think that's a really smart idea. It's very easy to get emails lost. You know, I interact with parents all the time with being an advocate, and sometimes they'll forget something, or it's in their personal email, or this and that. And so having that one email account that you only use for that school interaction can be really, really helpful in helping you keep things organized and documented, and you can refer to them easily as you need them. So our next topic will be related services. And so another quote, because you know I like quotes. Here we have, individually, we are one drop, but together we are an ocean. And I really believe that. I believe that every person, as they collaboratively work together on the team, can really, really make a big impact, much more than we can all do individually in serving for the needs of our children. So there are many service providers that your child may have within the school environment, and let's talk a little bit about those. So under the law, related services means transportation or developmental or supportive services that are required to assist a child with a disability. And that's the key word there, required. Under the law, it's not just what's best for a child, but does your child require that service in order to make benefit from their special education? That is what schools are responsible to provide. And so we must see, one, that a child has quote unquote disability. That's the language of the law, although you know we don't like to use that term per se. But one, your child must show that they have a disability under the law, and then two, that they require supports and services to address their unique needs so that they can benefit from their education. So there are a host of services that children have access to help support them in their special education. Some are less familiar than others. Speech and language pathology, of course, I think a lot of us are familiar with that. You know, that's what I used to provide for many years, and that's an area where it helps kids also in their social skills, which is sometimes less commonly known. But a child can go to speech not just for stuttering. They may go to speech because they have social language needs. And so that can be addressed by a speech pathologist, as well as their communication skills around expanding their language, all the way through kids who do stutter and kids who are minimally speaking or non-speaking who use communication devices. All of those can be provided through the speech language pathologist. Psychological services are also accessible and available to a child under an IEP. So if a child's having some mental health needs, and this is usually mental health needs that are not impacting a child, let's say, you know, in a large scale, then they may receive psychological services, and that's provided by the school psychologist. Physical therapy, OT is also another another big one for our kiddos who are having needs in the sensory realm. So if they're having some sensory needs, also if they're having fine motor needs, then that can be addressed through the occupational therapist. And sensory sometimes gets missed. So if your child is a sensory seeker, if they're a sensory avoider, if there's any kind of sensory needs, they should at least be evaluated by the OT to see if those services are warranted. APE for kiddos who struggle with being able to successfully navigate, you know, a playground if it's elementary school, or being able to successfully navigate their PE classes in middle and high school. They may require APE, which is different from physical therapy for kids who may be needing to work around range of motion and some of those things. Now, I talked about psychological services. Okay, that's provided by the school psychologist, but there's also counseling services. That is, those are provided by actually a licensed marriage and family therapist, typically. And so in some districts, it's referred to as MHRS, mental health related services. Others is ERMS, so educationally relevant mental health services. So your child, if they're having either more, you know, overt needs, or could also be more, you know, inwardly, maybe they have some anxiety, depression, some of those challenges, their school avoidance, then they may benefit from working with receiving counseling services by a specialist, by an MFT within the school environment. Some schools have these people on staff, like our larger districts. Other districts contract out and have people to provide this service for your child. And this is going to be especially important for our kiddos as they move into middle and high school, where we see more of the mental health challenges sometimes to developing. O&M, orientation and mobility for kiddos who have visual impairments is another option. School nursing services. If your child has any type of medical condition that would require some type of regular contact with a nurse, then that is an option to have school nursing services on the IEP. Even if it's asthma, some districts are starting to write that on, even if it's just that the nurse is maintaining their inhaler, or if it's in the diabetes, they're taking their insulin injections. If your child has an EpiPen, then your child may have at least a certain degree of annual school nurse services on the IEP. And then lastly, parent counseling and training is a part of the IEP as a related service. So if you are needing some support yourself around training, maybe around their communication device, or training on how to implement some of the strategies that the school is using, you can have access to some training that is provided by the team as a related service. So, sometimes parents will say, well, I don't know what my child should be getting. Are they missing anything? Nobody ever gives you a menu and says, here are the related services. Which one would you like, So I decided, and I created this slide because just to give you an example of what might be some of the possible services for a child. And again, every child is unique. Every child, even within one category, can display that in so many different ways and have so many different unique strengths and challenges. But just as an example, for kiddos and there's 13 eligibility categories under the law. For kiddos who are eligible for an IEP under autism, they typically have speech and language services and OT. That's usually bare minimum that a child with autism would have when it comes to related services. So it's something to consider. As our kiddos with autism get older, they may also require the mental health services. It could be that if you have a child who has some gross motor needs, they may also have APE. But at bare minimum, they typically will have speech and OT as a related service. For kiddos who have intellectual disability, these will be our kiddos with Down syndrome, those who are more significantly impacted by autism. They typically have more related services. And so that might include speech and OT. It may also include APE, like I just mentioned, helping with that gross motor around the playground or around, their PE services. And also, it's not a related service, but I wanted to mention that our kiddos who have significant cognitive needs, they may also be accessing a modified curriculum. And so as a result, they may be spending more of their day in a special day class. That's just an example. Our kiddos with ADHD who have attention challenges, they typically are eligible under OHI, like I mentioned, other health impaired. And so these kiddos typically have less service unless they have some comorbidity. If they have like a specific learning disability in addition to the ADHD, then they may have more. But at minimum, they will have OT usually, and that's going to address those sensory needs, that need for movement breaks, and those things is what might be provided by an OT for a child with attention deficit. They may access some counseling either with a school psychologist or under mental health. And then they typically would access accommodations. They wouldn't have a modified curriculum, but they may access accommodations and then spend more of their day in the general education environment. And so just as an example of what are some of the possible services based on eligibility categories. And as you're listening, again, if your questions are coming up, definitely feel free to add those to the chat because I look forward to responding and having this, our Q&A coming up soon. So another tip and trick here, tips and tricks. So how much is enough, right? This is the $1 million question. Parents always ask, well, how do I get more speech? How do I get more OT? How do I get more of whatever it is you believe your child needs? And again, we talked about in a few slides before, it's what your child requires. So if you believe your child requires more in order to be able to successfully engage in their education, what does that look like? So this is typically what I tell parents. And it starts from present levels, right? So in your IEP, every year, they are to indicate where your child is performing in every area of academic and functional performance. And that's present levels of academic and functional performance. So you should see that in your child's IEP. That information should be current. So, and it's been tricky with COVID and school closures, but that the next IEP you have, there should be some current information in regards to your child's levels of performance in reading, writing, math, behavior, attention, health. All those areas should be covered. Based on those present levels, where your child's performing, what their strengths are, what their challenges are, that's the information that tells us, okay, when we know my child's struggling here, this is going to need to be a goal. So then based on the good current information and data in the present levels, that's going to determine how many goals your child has. So if your child in the present levels is struggling in math, there should be a math goal. If it's behavior, there should be a behavior goal, and so on and so forth. So that's going to help us know how many goals. Well, once we know how many goals your child has, let's say your child has 10 goals, that's, I see that, often, then that's going to determine what kinds of services they have and to what degree. And so if your child has 10 goals, let's say two of them are around gross motor needs, then they should have APE, adaptive PE, as an area of service. If 3 of them are around fine motor and sensory needs, then they should have OT. And if there's communication, there should be speech and language. So the goals are going to tell us what services your child should have and how much. And I'm not saying to then go in and, okay, if that's the case, let's pile up 25 goals there. You've got to be really smart about goals. In a class that I teach an IEP class every month for a regional center, and we talk about SMART goals. So goals should be strategic, they should be relevant, and so you want to have annually the most strategic, relevant, time-based goals that your child needs for the year. And it's a year by year consideration. And so let's say your child has 10 goals this year. That's going to determine which services they have and then how much. If there's 5 speech goals, and I've seen this as an advocate, if a kid has 5 speech goals, then there's no way that child should have 30 minutes a week of speech. That's going to be a child that needs more supports and services in the area of speech. They may need to work with the speech pathologist for, 45 minutes a week or 90 minutes a week. And so it's whatever has been determined as an area of need and what goals are going to be worked on, that's going to determine how much service is needed. And then that leads us to the discussion of FAPE and the hours that are needed for that area. And so if we can kind of follow this and starting off with good quality data and present levels information, then we're going to be developing the best IEP for your child. Make sure that we stay on track. All right, our next discussion area is advocate, attorney, or both. And so let's look at another idea here. So I love, again, quotes, images. And so if you feel like this when you're reading your child's IEP, it could be that you are in need of working with an advocate, attorney, or both. Especially when it's the year when your child is reevaluated. I've seen, IEPs be 100 pages plus on a year when a child's being evaluated. So it can totally feel like this. And if that's the case, then that just might be a sign that you are in need of maybe work with someone who can support you. So another poll question is, have you ever engaged with a professional for IEP support? So again, so that we can kind of gauge our learning, has anyone ever worked with an attorney or an advocate? Maybe you have engaged with a free parent advocacy group. There are several groups that are out there now that offer free support for parents. Or maybe you've been a lone ranger and maybe you've just been on your own in the IEP process. But I'd be curious to hear if parents have done any interaction yet. So it looks like we've got a lone ranger. Yeah, a few have, no. And nothing wrong with, although again, it does take a village, but sometimes we're just not, we don't have information. And so without the information, many of us do just go it alone. I totally get that. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why I developed my company, for that very reason. All right. So what would it look like, and what does it look like to work with an attorney around your child's IEP needs? So a special education attorney is an attorney who specializes in representing parents through their disputes with school districts in the area of education. Let's see. Okay, all right, looks like someone did bring an advocate with them. Awesome. Um, And so, attorneys practice in various areas of law, but there are some who specialize in this area often after having their own child with unique needs. You'll see where some attorneys were practicing in other areas and they decided to make the shift into special education or have a sibling, with unique needs. Sometimes that's the case. So when is it best to work with an attorney? Well, for cases that are more complex, cases that require interviewing witnesses, presenting lots of evidence, those are cases that are best for working with a special education attorney. An attorney can do many things in supporting you. They can assess the strength of your case. Many of them will offer you a free consultation and they'll look at your just cursory review of your information and they'll let you know, do you really have a case in regards to filing a complaint against a school district. They can help you to informally resolve the dispute through mediation. And about 90% of cases, I'll tell you, are resolved if you would say settled outside of court. Cases do not go before a hearing officer or a judge. They're often 90% of the time settled through mediation. I was just talking with some attorneys in LA. They represent parents in LA County and Orange County. They said the very same thing for them, that 90% of the time, because they do their due diligence in helping parents with their complaints, they are often able to settle just through mediation. So attorneys can help you that way. Attorneys can help to research specific legal issues that apply to your situation. For example, one of the issues that has been there, and yes, so true, parents pay the fee. Oh yeah, we'll talk about that. One of the issues has been masks. I know Thomas Nelson, who was an attorney that presented here at Brain Balance previously, he has taken on the topic of masks. And so he's done just a ton of research for those parents who have children who have a medical waiver for masks, yet schools are telling them that they are not going to allow them to engage to certain degrees in school if the child is unable to wear a mask, even though the child medically has the waiver not to wear a mask. So Thomas is taking that on. So sometimes they can do special research around your case. Attorneys can help you file a due process complaint with the Office of Administrative Hearings as needed. Also, they can represent you in court, be it during a hearing or actually, if it has to go to the Ninth Circuit and move on, they can represent you there, or they can represent you in mediation. They can also write post-hearing briefs. Now, I think someone mentioned about this earlier. Attorney fees may be reimbursed as reasonable attorney fees if the school is found to be at fault. So if you file a due process complaint and you are found to quote unquote win the case and the school is found to be at fault, then your attorney fees may be absorbed. There are some attorneys that will require that you pay up front, and there are others that will say that they will just attempt to get their fees, they'll do it pro bono and they'll attempt to get their fees reimbursed and absorbed through the settlement. And so it just depends on the attorney. But if you are in need of an attorney, if your case is strong, if you have really a complex case where you need to really show a lot of evidence in regards to the negligence of the school, then it might be a relevant thing for you to contact an attorney and to do a free consultation to see if that's the right move for you in this situation. Now, another option is what I do, special education advocacy. Some will refer themselves as special education consultant or a non-attorney advocate. All those terms mean the same thing, basically. This is a person who specializes in representing parents through disputes with schools as well. And a special education advocate may or may not have a certification. There is actually at this time no licensure for an advocate. And so you just need to be just vet like you would, with anyone that you're going to work with. Just do some, research, ask some really good questions, but there is no specific certification or licensure. There is a board, COPA, the Council of Advocates and Providers, that does provide a certificate and a membership, but there is no required certification for advocates at this time. An advocate may have experience as a service provider, or maybe they have been, providing some type of an educationally relevant service as a professional, or they may not. They could just be a parent who's had a lot of experience, and now they're using that experience and passing that on to families. So you will just need to ask and do your due diligence in that. So when would it be best to work with an advocate? Well, for those initial attempts to resolve disagreements with schools, that might be a really good time to work with an advocate. I like to work with parents who have preschoolers who they're engaging in their very first IEP. I like to work with them. I like to start the IEP process strong with them, setting up some really clear expectations for IEP teams so that parents know what to expect and teams know as well. If you have made attempts in having your IEP meeting, maybe trying to move through and make some progress and you have not been successful, then potentially that might be a good time to work with an advocate. If you're looking to better understand the IEP process and your rights, then working with an advocate in lieu of working with an attorney might be a good thing, especially this one, because attorneys typically don't spend a lot of time discussing with you about your rights and explaining those things. They're really diving into your case and just in looking at, how to negotiate that. But if you're looking to really do some learning along the way, then you may be served better by working with an advocate. Now, an advocate's ability in California, I'm going to talk about just in California because it does vary from state to state, but advocates can, of course, attend IEP meetings with you. Attorneys can attend IEP meetings with you as well. Sometimes it's not recommended because having an attorney attend an IEP meeting, it really does change the atmosphere, and it could really set things off depending on where you are and your level of negotiation with your IEP team. So I don't always recommend to bring an attorney with you, but having an advocate can, not necessarily be seen as adversarial. So you can bring an advocate with you to a meeting. Advocates can help analyze your IEP documents, and they can help you make records requests for that. Advocates can also help recommend goals and services. They can also help you file a compliance complaint, which is different than a due process complaint. So if you have a really clear complaint, like the example I gave earlier, the OT, let's say when on maternity leave, your child has not received OT services for 3 months. That's a really clear violation of FAPE, okay? No one gave your kids services. And so you could file a compliance complaint with the California Department of Education using, and the advocate can assist you with that. And you could see movement in that without ever having to contact an attorney, because that's a really clear cut and dry case in comparison to a case that could be a little bit more complex. An advocate can also support you as you represent yourself in mediation or hearings, but an advocate cannot represent you in mediation or in hearings. Only an attorney can do that in the state of California. And then lastly, advocates' fees are not reimbursable under the law, unfortunately. But many offer payment plans, sliding scales, military discounts, and such things. So again, and also a free consultation. So you can always contact an advocate and see, if you feel that may be a good fit, and see how you can move forward. It can definitely be a good investment in your child's education. So there are times when you might need to engage with both. And what would that look like? Well, if let's say you've begun your work with a non-attorney advocate, okay, and so then you have attempted to address your IEP concerns, and this has happened to me recently. We've begun our work, let's say we've got 10 things, because I go through with the fine-tooth comb and I go through this, and we working with the parent, knowing the child, we'd say, here are the 10 things that we want to see change in the IEP, okay, and let's say 8 of those things get addressed. The team agrees. They relent, whatever you want to call it. But there's 2 things that they're not willing to move on. If that is the case, then potentially the advocate may encourage you to transition to work with an attorney if you are willing and interested in filing a due process complaint. And then at that time, the advocate can continue to support you and the attorney as you're going through the process of mediation, and as you wait for your hearing, although often, again, you'll be end up settling in mediation. So there could be a time where the advocate is helping to support you because he has considered that person has special knowledge about you and about the case, and sharing that knowledge with the attorney while you're all working together through your due process complaint. So there are those unique cases, but again, that's typically, again, about 10% of the time. 90% of the time when you're working with an advocate that is knowledgeable and knows well how to work with your case, you will likely see movement at the IEP table. So some final thoughts on IEPs. So my last quote for the evening: teamwork is the ability to work together towards a common vision, and that vision is your child's success. And so again, as we are working collaboratively with our teams, the goal is our child's success. And I believe that with support, with some tweaks sometimes in our language, and holding teams accountable, we can see our child's success. So my last few thoughts here. Number one is don't go it alone. I always encourage parents, again, have someone come with you to the IEP meeting. It could be a loved one, it could be your child's, ABA therapist, BCBA, it could be the regional center coordinator, but have someone attend with you. Having that support system can just be so valuable. Oftentimes you're sitting in an IEP meeting, if we're meeting in person, which at some point maybe that's going to happen, although I'm enjoying the meetings by Zoom. But just, considering that, there are, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 district employees or professionals at a table, and then on the other side of the table, it's just you, the parent. But wouldn't it be nice? I had an IEP meeting, and we ended up having 3 meetings, but in this case, it was myself, the advocate, it was the 2 parents, and it was the grandmother who just happened to also be a retired teacher. And so it was the 4 of us, and then there were about 5 professionals, and that was more balance, and those parents, and this was their very first IEP meeting, they really felt supported, and I've really enjoyed working with them and helping them to empower them along their process. So, don't go it alone if you have the ability to have someone come with you. Ask questions and trust your gut. This is one of the quotes that I tell parents all the time. Because why? You know your child best. Other professionals could have degrees, PhDs, and whatnot, but you have a PhD in your child. You do know your child best. You are equipped to have a seat at that table and engage as a successful, knowledgeable partner at the IEP meeting. And so I would really encourage you to trust your gut. If you feel as though something's not right at the IEP meeting, something's not right when it comes to services, it may not be, and likely it's not. So I encourage you to trust your intuition, ask questions. Teams are accountable under the law. They are accountable and responsible to answer your questions when it comes to your child's IEP. So I would really encourage you to do that. Ask those questions and don't relent, don't give up. If a team talks to you like a politician and talks around your question, ask it again, put it in writing. And all these things are, again, documenting your attempts to have your voice be heard, and that can serve you very well if in the future you need to file a complaint. So we are at the point of our Q&A for this evening. So feel free in the chat to let us know those questions, and I will be happy to do my best to answer some of those this evening. First, I'm going to get some water.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. That was really, really helpful. I always learn more from experts like you, and I hope the rest of our attendees took away some nuggets. I have some questions for everyone, or for you, Crystal, from everyone that wasn't fully addressed in your presentation. If there are other questions that you're wanting to know, please feel free to type it into the chat or send it to me directly as well in the chat. If you want to keep it private, that's not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and keep recording though, because I think some of these questions are really helpful for other families, if you don't mind. So stay muted if you don't want to be recorded, and keep your cameras off as well. Okay, everyone? Okay, so first question, Crystal. Is an IEP considered special education? Okay, give me 1 second. Is an IEP considered special education?
Yes. So a great question. An IEP, yes, is considered special education. So under the law, IDEA, federal law, it is the federal law that governs special education in our country. And so under IDEA, school districts implement and create an IEP to provide services and supports to a child. So an IEP is a process, it's also a document. It is an individualized education program that is developed, a document that is created and revised every year. And it's also a meeting and a process that is engaged in, again, every year to provide for the needs of children with unique needs. So yes, an IEP is a part of special education.
Perfect. And so along those lines, how negotiable is IEP and how difficult is it to change, basically?
So another great question, how negotiable is an IEP? An IEP is actually very negotiable because of all of the rights that parents have under the law. And so if you are aware that there are some things that are, not right, your child's not, maybe not, you're concerned your child's not getting the right amount of service, or that your child should be eligible, maybe under a different eligibility category, or whatever it might be, then you have a space to do like what I said, trust your gut about that and ask those questions. How easy is it to make change? Well, it depends on what it is. If it's something like, let's say, service hours, you think your child needs more services. Well, that could mean that maybe we need a new evaluation that shows, or maybe there's not enough new data that shows how your child's performing. And then from that, then we can help, that's going to help substantiate your case for asking for more hours. So some changes that you're requesting may require new data, more data. Some things could just be very simple and they could just be easily asked for, but it's just all about how you ask it, right? And so let's say you're saying, my child's not getting enough OT hours and I want more. Well, instead of saying it that way, we talked earlier about, those pitfalls. It could be that you're saying, I'm not seeing my child make significant progress or progress at all in this area of motor. This speaks to me that my child might require more OT services. Can you tell me more about what that would look like? So when you're using language like that, that's going to help in your ability to negotiate and make some changes. So it's just all about, how you say, how you use the law and speak the language of the law that can help you to negotiate in your IEP. But sometimes, and it can also depend on the team that you're working with as well. So, but there is movement and you do have rights. And so I always encourage parents to make those attempts at seeing your questions be heard and be addressed.
So slight twist to that question, what if you feel like you need or would like your child to have more general education time versus the resource teacher?
Okay, so that is true too. I mean, that happens all the time because again, we talked about earlier, FAPE and the LRE, right? So your child should be receiving a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. And so there are times when teams they haven't considered, they haven't thought about outside the box. Let's just say your child may have needs, yes, but your child may also have some strengths in an area that would allow them to be really successful in a general education environment. Maybe with an aid, or maybe even just going mainstreaming without an aid support or a special education support. So you may need to, again, in that case, have the data that shows that, hey, yes, my child is performing, here and there, low here and there, but they have some real strengths in this area, and that's going to help substantiate your case to show that they have the ability to be successful and require access and should be given their right to have access to that least restrictive environment.
Great answer. And then slightly along those lines too, what are your thoughts about balancing what's being requested, the services being requested or suggested, I should say, when, versus letting the kid naturally, organically grow. How much is putting these different measures in place, making them dependent?
That's really a good question, and it really is a case by case, consideration. You know your child best. I'm a big proponent of trials, right? And so, let's say a child has been receiving a certain level of service, they've been successful. You may want to trial 6 weeks, or 4 weeks. Maybe let's say they've been receiving supports, they've been engaging with an aide. Maybe we're going to do a trial of 4 weeks without the aide and see how they and continue to measure their progress and see if they're making progress or not. That's really the requirement of the law so far as when you're pulling away resources is that fading, that gentle fading. And so, I am a big proponent of doing trials. And if a child continues to be successful as you're slowly fading those things away, then that's giving you data that shows that service is no longer required. You can also trial, the other way as well. So I think giving them trials, especially as they get older, can be really important.
Okay, and then a more general question is, how long should the IEP process be? And do you recommend them carrying this over to college, and would it affect things like grants and scholarships?
So a child is eligible to continue to receive an IEP through, again, until they receive a high school diploma or they age out at California at age 22 and a half. So a child, in theory, could continue to receive supports. Let's say they have, dyslexia, learning disabilities, and such things. They could continue to receive support by a special education teacher through high school. And then you could engage the Disability Services Department at your college, university, community college. And then at that point, the child or young adult would only get access to accommodations. And so that should not interfere with anything when it comes to their ability to, be accepted into a university, because any student who attends a college has the ability to access these the Disability Services Department. So it really depends on your child and their needs. If they could, again, if they access services in college, it's going to be just accommodation. So things like a note taker, things like being able to take their tests in a different environment, being able to have additional time to complete assignments. If you feel as though your young adult really requires those accommodations, then you may want to investigate that in college. It could be that you trial, again, I'm a proponent of trials, maybe trial them without the supports. And then if they begin to have some struggles in that, first semester or so, then maybe you engage the Disability Services Department at that time.
Thank you for that. I always tell parents that too. Just because you have an IEP or a 504 plan, it doesn't mean you have to utilize it, right? It's just these are the suggestions and these are your rights. So it doesn't hurt to have it, I think. And when you need it, it's there for you, right? Like extra test taking time, for instance. That comes up quite a bit when parents ask me these types of questions. What about how long should the process take?
So there are timelines when it comes to IEPs. I'm trying to think about your question here. How long should the process take? If the child is found eligible for an IEP, if we're saying for the first time, right? So if a parent suspects a child is eligible for an IEP, you make a request for an evaluation. The team has 15 days to respond with an assessment plan. Then you sign that. Then the team has 60 days in order to do their evaluation and have a meeting. And so, if you look at that time span when it comes to having a child's initial IEP, every 3 years, that process happens again. A child's reevaluated, more tests reassessed to see if they continue to meet eligibility. And so, that process typically spans somewhere around 3 months when it comes to that initial evaluation or the 3-year evaluation. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great clarification. And what about when you're transitioning, say, from elementary school to middle school or middle school to high school, and you want some other services changes in that IEP, but the school's recommending you to wait until you get to the school? Should they sign the IEP as is, with or without those services? What are your thoughts?
So transition years are really, really important. That elementary to middle, that middle to high school, and then that high school going on into adulthood. And so there typically should be a transition meeting attached to that last IEP at that environment. So when your child is in 5th grade, if your elementary school ends at 5th grade and your child has an IEP meeting in their 5th grade year, a part of that should be a transition meeting. And in theory, good schools will actually have team members from the middle school or representative of some sort come and be a part of your child's 5th grade IEP meeting. And so you talk about those big questions at that time. Your concerns about maybe they need, more speech and motor T, they need mental health service, whatever that might be. You talk about those things at that meeting. If you're not able to get any agreement, then you can do what's called partial consent. So you could consent to the parts of the IEP that you agree with, and then at least those pieces would get implemented. If you agree that your child's still eligible, you could sign and agree to that part. If you agree with the goals, you could, but parts that you're not in agreement with, then you would consent to those, and then you would have and request an IEP meeting within the first 30 days of the school year once your child actually gets into that environment so that you can address those additional concerns.
Okay, and then I think we have one more question. It's a little bit more specific. Is it common for individual speech therapy to become group speech therapy when you transition from early intervention to preschool?
Individual to be, you know what? Every child is different. You could, I mean, I provided individual speech therapy to kiddos in elementary school. I provided it in middle school, honestly, for kiddos who just, their needs were unique enough that they were not easily addressed, and I could not easily address them and support them within a group environment. So in that case, I had a time where the child had one session of individual and then they had one session of group. So they had both. And so looking at the transition from, was it preschool to elementary school? Was that the case? Oh, onto preschool. Okay, so a little one who's going into the preschool environment within their public school environment, can there be individual? Typically, does it shift to only group? It doesn't have to. It depends on the needs of the child. I had a case earlier this year where we had a kiddo, and that kiddo required, and the team agreed, he required some individual work to work on his speech sounds and his communication device. He also was accessing group work with the group to work on his social skills needs. So again, if you think about that slide that I showed earlier, it's all about what are the needs of the child, and that's going to help determine the goals, and then those goals are going to help determine what kind and how much service your child's going to need. So really, it depends on where their strengths and their needs are when it comes to their communication skills.
Okay, and then we got another one in. What if during progress reports, teachers add notes to things that they observe for the IEP goals, meeting goals, but you never see those same notes for home or homework?
So you only get that information at progress report time, but you don't get it. Yeah. So that's where you're missing some home to school communication. And that's why I talk to parents a lot about, we make sure that home to school communication is added in as an accommodation in the IEP, because you should not just be getting this kind of information on a quarterly basis. Amanda, I'm going to tell you that this computer needs to be charged, I think. Battery running low. Okay. And then hopefully parents, you can still hear me. But home to school communication is really important. So you should not just be getting new information all of a sudden at the progress report time. You should have access to that on a pretty regular basis. And so those are things to be discussed at the IEP meeting, setting the expectations. Team, I expect every 2 weeks or every month to, I'd like a touch base just to see how my kid is doing in regards to their goals. And if you set the stage that way, and if you set that expectation, then everybody is on the same page and everyone knows to provide you with that level of information. If you don't state that, you're not going to get it. So if you don't clarify that, if you don't put it in writing in the IEP meeting notes or somewhere in the IEP, then it's not going to happen. And so I just encourage you to have those conversations at the IEP meeting time so those things are added into the IEP. Also, you may want to, if necessary, request another IEP meeting. It could be if your IEP isn't due, let's say it's not due until June, you may want to request another IEP meeting so that you can get some of these concerns addressed and getting these things in writing in your child's IEP so that you're not waiting another 6 months for that.
Okay, final call. If anybody has any questions, these have been really great and informative, I hope, for everyone. There's a thank you so far.
Okay, you guys have asked some really, really great questions.
Yeah. I'll give everyone just another minute, and it takes time to process information and type. Jackie said thank you.
My pleasure. So I really commend parents for being here this evening, taking this time out in an evening during the summer to learn about IEPs. I applaud you for that. So, kudos to you guys for being here. It's my pleasure.
Agreed. I agree. Okay, so there is one last question. The question is, how about finding a school with a better IEP team?
Good luck. I tell parents will say, well, what's the best school for my kid to go to? Or, we live in this area, what's the best school? The best school for your child to go to is the school where your voice is heard. And that can happen at any school. If you set the stage, if you set the expectation, you can have a successful interaction. Now, there are those rare cases where there are teams, and teams can change from year to year. People retire, people move, they transition. So you don't know per se who's going to be on the team every year. But there are times when there are IEP teams that are, stuck in their ways. Maybe they follow some paradigms that are not, very inclusive for kiddos. There are those times where you have those, challenges. But I believe that if you set your expectation, if you document everything in writing, there's a chance for you to see movement in your child's IEP. If you have been unsuccessful, there are many ways to address your concerns. You can always have an advocate team with you. You can file a complaint at the school district level. So every school district has a compliance department, and so you may need to, and I've had to personally do this as a parent of a child with an IEP, file a complaint at the district level. You also have the opportunity to file a compliance complaint in other ways to have your needs, your voice be heard. So you do have those options, but I think that it is always a good thing to make an attempt to express your concerns, put that in writing, give the team an opportunity to respond before you then determine what your next steps are.
Awesome. Okay, we are getting a lot of thank yous, and I think we're good for tonight. So I agree with Crystal. Thank everyone for taking the time to learn, and thank you again, Crystal, for serving our amazing community We hope everyone has a great summer. Come join us next month if you want to learn more about brain balance and getting ready for back to school. And then Crystal and Brain Balance will be following up with you if you have any additional questions and how we can support your journey. But it is a journey, keep that in mind, and it takes a village for sure. So keep chugging on, and we will be in touch. Okay, take care.